It's 8:35, 25 minutes now before the hour of 9 o'clock this week. The U.S. Supreme Court, or next, but it is expected soon, is expected to decide the fate of roughly 350 people convicted of or charged with obstruction for trespassing in and around the Capitol on J6. The outcome of that decision on Section 1512 will also greatly affect Donald Trump's case as well. Joining us this morning is a former Army reservist and J6er Tim Hale. Tim, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me on. Good morning.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Again, and what were you convicted of, and how long, what kind of a sentence did you get?
I got a couple misdemeanors like trespassing, but the main charge, the one felony I got, was the 18 U.S.C. 1512 charge that's right in front of SCOTUS right now, the obstruction charge. And I got a sentence of 4 years. I had to serve 3 out of that.
Yeah, and so you're out now. And sure. If the SCOTUS rules in favor of the J6 defendants like yourself, the felony conviction will be overturned, and then you'll no longer be a convicted felon. So that is the immediate ramification. But what other consequences would come of this? Because this section, as I understand it, was kind of bastardized and distorted and put on steroids to come after you guys.
Well, that's exactly right. For those that don't know, the 1512 charge originates from a statute from the 80s called tampering with a witness. It was actually after the Enron scandal in 2003 that a substatute was added dealing with the destruction of documents. That's really what the obstruction charge is for. It's a substatute of a larger statute, and it's basically about obstructing Congress when they're investigating something. But the first judge to uphold this, I believe, was Judge Dabney Friedrich. And what's interesting about her is that her husband, Matthew, was actually an official in the DOJ who was on the Enron task force. And she also first upheld 1512 for federal informants. A couple of the J6 defendants named Josiah Colt, Ronnie Sandlin, and Nathan DeGrave. So it's just a little weird that a woman who's actually connected to the very scandal that led to this statute first upheld these charges for federal informants. And, you talked about ramifications. This is also not just being used against J6ers, sir. It's also being used against President Trump. Trump is being charged with 1512 as well. This is very suspicious. I would say most people, if they looked at this, would say this judge should have recused herself. This should not have gotten this far at all.
Yeah, we're seeing this all across the federal judiciary of this, first, the weaponization of agencies against not only people like yourself, but President Trump. They've also gone after pro-lifers who have now been given 2 or 3 year sentences in violation of the FACE Act. But we're also, I think it was Andy Biggs of Congress who came up with a timeline just last week of the collusion that the current White House and the DOJ and its attorneys and some judges are all basically working together to stifle dissent and put their political opponents in jail.
I mean, that's exactly right, sir. And, it's an interesting observation I made while I was locked up in the gulag in Washington, D.C. for January 6th. There were actually environmental radicals who were ramming bike racks into police in D.C. at that time, and they never wound up. They never wound up in the gulag with us. And this is totally weaponized, and this would be, according to my understanding of case law, this would be a representation of what we would call selective prosecution. This is a 14th Amendment violation. It's not that even ignoring that the statutes don't even fit the application of law, they don't. Even if they did, they're being applied with what we would call an evil eye and an uneven hand. And so this is selective prosecution. It's a violation of equal protection under the law, and it's being used to target Trump and his supporters. There's no way around it.
You were in 3 years, and you've been out for 6 months or so now. What were the conditions like when you were incarcerated in the D.C. gulag?
Well, I don't want to embellish, but we called it the gulag for a reason, and that's that basically the Bill of Rights was suspended, originally under the guise of COVID, and then eventually just because they didn't like us. Ultimately, we weren't allowed to have religious services. They frequently blocked our access to attorney visits. We had no access to family visitation. We had basically no medical care. We were in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. And it was it was pretty bad. You know,
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's interesting too is that they housed a bunch of informants with us to sabotage our cases, so that even when they finally did let us out of our cells, we were being spied on. There was a lot going on in there, a lot more than meets the eye. But yeah, just in terms of due process and basic civil rights, we were denied all of it. You know, what's interesting too is this isn't necessarily on the jail, but they denied us the right to a speedy trial as well. So it took me 16 months, a year and a half, to see my day in court when I pressed for it nonstop. But the Speedy Trial Act actually says you're supposed to be able to get a trial in 70 days. So they kept postponing that. You weren't even allowed to get to groom. And people don't understand this. I post pictures on my Twitter account of me that I was able to, sneak out of the jail, and I have hair down to the back of my neck. I was in the military for 12 years, never had long hair. So, I mean, you couldn't groom. You couldn't get haircuts. You were covered in blisters.
Yeah. Again, I want to touch on that for a second because you served your country 12 years in the United States military, and then to be treated like this, having misdemeanors amped up into this bogus felony charge is, 1512. Do you regret serving your country? Do you recognize your country? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I would never say I regret serving my country. It's an interesting question. It's disappointing more than anything. This could be. Let me say this: if I had not been charged for this nonsense, if I had stayed in, I would actually be close to retirement. I would almost be near my 20-year retirement time. It's kind of interesting. I might have a pension,
Yeah.
But that's just material. But it's disheartening because I did lose a lot. I was an amateur comedian on the side. When I became an Army reservist, I worked for the Navy as well as a weapons contractor. I was a union leader. I was doing a lot of stuff,
right.
I kind of lost all that. But I can always rebuild. But
yeah.
A lot of, to be fair, a lot of people have it a lot worse than I do.
Did any member of Congress, your local congressman, did they contact you? Did they help you in any way?
Absolutely not. And it's actually interesting you mentioned that. I don't talk about this much. I actually got backstabbed by Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey. I was actually working with his office to investigate abuse of veterans on that Navy base I just mentioned working at as a contractor. And they completely suspended the investigation once I was charged. And then of course Chris Smith voted against Donald Trump when he voted for that ridiculous House committee about January 6th. So I was very disappointed about that. And then, but I will say, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Louis Gohmert, they actually came inside the D.C. jail. They were turned away more than once, and they finally forced their way in, and they got to look at our conditions, and they did file some reports about that.
Right.
But very few members of Congress actually cared about us.
Well, that's so disappointing, but this is where we are as a country right now, so polarized, and we are awaiting that Supreme Court ruling. We hope it comes down in your favor, and we wish you all the best. We'll talk after the court rules.
You got it. I appreciate that, sir.
All right, Tim. That's Tim Hale. Served our country 12 years in the United States military. J6 defendant. He's out now, and we'll see where it happens. Stay